Your children don't fit the brand image for Madison's party." My sister Jessica said it into the phone as casually as if she were ordering a latte. She didn't stumble. She didn't apologize. She just delivered the verdict. "The Azure Cove Yacht Club has a specific aesthetic, Samantha. I have VIP guests flying and people Andrew needs to impress. I can't have unpolished children running around ruining the visual." I gripped the granite edge of my island. It wasn't about capacity. It was about curation. My children weren't family to her. They were bad marketing. "It's nothing personal," she added, her voice airy. "It's just business. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I hung up the phone and stared at the blank screen. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it across the room. I just felt a cold, heavy stone settle in my stomach. It wasn't the rudeness that paralyzed me. It was the logistics of the heartbreak I now had to deliver. My 6-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son were in the next room drawing pictures for a cousin they adored. They had been talking about Madison's birthday for 3 weeks. They had outfits picked out. They had practiced how to say happy birthday without shouting. And now I had to walk in there and tell them they weren't wanted. I walked into the playroom. They looked up beaming, holding up crayon drawings of balloons and cakes. I sat on the floor, trying to keep my voice steady. "Guys, plans have changed," I said, forcing a smile that felt like plastic. "We aren't going to Madison's party on Saturday." I expected a tantrum. I expected tears about cake or goodie bags. I was prepared for disappointment. I was not prepared for the quiet. My daughter lowered her drawing. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask about the bouncy castle. She looked at me with wide, devastatingly serious eyes and asked the one question that would burn down my relationship with my sister forever. "Mommy, are we bad kids?" Her voice was a whisper. "Is that why Madison can't play with us? Because we're not good?" The air left the room. This is the thing people like Jessica don't understand about children. Children don't understand concepts like venue capacity or brand image. To a child, exclusion is a mirror. When family shuts the door, a child doesn't look at the door and think, "Oh, they must be busy." They look in the mirror and see a defect. They don't think Aunt Jessica is rude. They think I am unlovable. My sister hadn't just uninvited them from a party. She had handed my children a distorted mirror and told them to stare at their own inadequacy. "No," I said, my voice fierce, pulling them both into my chest so they couldn't see my face. "You are perfect. You are wonderful. This has nothing to do with you." But I could feel the doubt in their small bodies. The damage was done. The seed was planted. And in that moment my sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical rage. That night when Matthew came home, the house was silent. The kids were asleep, exhausted from crying. I was sitting at the kitchen island in the dark, a glass of water untouched in front of me. Matthew walked in, loosening his tie. He saw my face and stopped. He didn't say a word. He just waited. I told him everything. I told him about the brand image. I told him about the VIP guests. And then I told him what our daughter had asked me. I watched my husband carefully. Matthew is a man of few words. He is the kind of man who listens more than he speaks, whose power lies in his stillness. I expected him to be annoyed, maybe even angry, but I didn't get anger. I got something much more terrifying. He went completely still. He unbuttoned his cuffs with precise mechanical movements, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She said brand image?" he asked, his voice devoid of any inflection. "Yes." She said unpolished children would ruin the visual for Andrew's investors. Matthew nodded once slowly. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He didn't shout insults at my sister. He just walked over to the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and took a long, slow sip. When he turned back to me, his face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were different. They were cold. They were calculating. "Okay," he said. Just one word. But in that single word, I heard the sound of a judge passing a sentence from which there would be no appeal. He wasn't just a husband defending his wife anymore. He was a father who had just decided that someone was going to pay for making his children feel small. And Matthew had the currency to ensure the price was steep. The next morning I drove to my parents' house. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for sanity. Surely my mother, the woman who still kept my kindergarten handprint in a frame, would understand that excluding an 8-year-old's cousins based on brand image was madness. I walked into their kitchen expecting outrage. Instead, I found a united front. My mother Patricia was arranging hydrangeas in a vase while my father James read the paper. They looked up as I entered, their expressions guarded. I didn't waste time. Did you know? I asked. Did you know Jessica uninvited the kids because they aren't polished enough for her yacht party? My mother sighed, the sound of someone forced to deal with a tedious child. Samantha, honey, don't use that word. It is harsh, Mom. It's cruel. She told my daughter she didn't fit the aesthetic. She's under a lot of pressure, my father said, folding his paper. You don't understand the level Andrew is operating at now. This party isn't just a birthday. It's a networking event. He's closing a $45 million development deal for a resort. The investors will be there. I stared at them. So, my children are a liability to a business deal. They're 6 and 4. They're well behaved. Since when does our family prioritize investors over grandchildren? It's not about prioritizing, my mother said, smoothing a petal. It's about the bigger picture. Jessica and Andrew are trying to build a life. They need this to go perfectly. Having unpredictable elements could distract from the atmosphere they need to curate. Unpredictable elements. That's what my children were to them now. Not family. Not flesh and blood. Just chaotic variables in a curated life. You're enabling her, I said, my voice rising. You're telling her it's okay to treat people like props. We're supporting her success, my father countered, his tone hardening. And frankly, Samantha, you're being selfish. You're making this about your feelings instead of celebrating your sister's ambition. Andrew is going places. We should all be helping them get there, not dragging them down with petty grievances. I looked around the kitchen I grew up in. It was the same granite, the same oak cabinets, but the air had changed. It was thinner now, harder to breathe. I realized then that my parents weren't just bystanders, they were gatekeepers. They had bought into Jessica's delusion because they wanted to be adjacent to that success. They wanted to be the parents of the wealthy developer's wife, the grandparents who summered at the resort. If sacrificing my children's feelings was the price of admission to that elite club, they had already paid it. I see, I said quietly. I understand the bigger picture now. I walked out without saying goodbye. They thought I was accepting my place. They thought I was agreeing to stand behind the velvet rope they had erected around their new shiny life. But as I got into my car, I wasn't thinking about acceptance. I was thinking about what Matthew had said the night before. My parents believed that exclusivity was power. They believed that by curating their circle, they were elevating themselves. But they didn't understand the mechanics of true exclusivity. They were about to learn that when you build a wall to keep people out, you also lock yourself in with the consequences. Saturday arrived with a sky so blue it felt like an insult. It was the kind of weather that wedding photographers pray for and event planners charge extra to guarantee. Perfect yachting weather. While my sister was undoubtedly overseeing the placement of linen napkins and instructing servers on the proper angle to pour champagne at the Azure Cove Yacht Club, I was packing juice boxes and granola bars into a backpack. We didn't tell the kids about the party happening across town. We told them we had a surprise adventure. We drove them to the city planetarium. It was a conscious choice. If Jessica wanted to teach them about exclusion and velvet ropes, I wanted to teach them about the universe. I wanted them to see something so vast, so infinite that the petty social hierarchy of a birthday party would seem microscopic by comparison. Inside the domed theater, the lights dimmed and the artificial city skyline faded into a brilliant star-studded black. My children gasped. They reached up as if they could pluck the constellations from the dark. For an hour there were no VIP lists. There were no brand images. There was just wonder. They were small, yes, but they were small in the way we all are against the backdrop of galaxies, not small because an ant decided they weren't important enough to make the cut. But even in the dark, the ghost of the other party haunted me. I checked my watch. 2:00. The guests would be arriving. Andrew would be shaking hands, flashing his veneer smile, scanning the room for the investors who held his future in their portfolios. Jessica would be posing, making sure every angle was flattering, every moment capture-ready. When we emerged from the theater, blinking in the harsh afternoon sunlight, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Then it buzzed again. And again. The family group chat. I didn't want to look. I knew it would hurt. But the compulsion to see the life we were barred from was too strong. Photos were flooding in. Pictures of crystal flutes against the sparkling water. Pictures of my parents beaming, holding cocktails, looking every inch the proud grandparents of the chosen child. And then a photo from Jessica. It was a wide shot of the deck populated by men in linen suits and women in silk sundresses. The decor was immaculate, all white and gold, sterile and expensive. The caption read, "So glad we kept it exclusive, the vibe is perfect." It wasn't enough to exclude us. She had to celebrate the exclusion. She had to frame our absence not as a regret but as a design feature. Kept it exclusive, that was the dagger. She was bragging that the party was better because my children weren't there to tarnish it. I felt a shadow fall over my shoulder. Matthew was standing behind me looking at the screen. He hadn't said much all day, just watched the kids with a fierce protective intensity. Now he read the caption. He looked at the photo of the sleek child-free deck where Andrew was holding court. He didn't frown. He didn't sigh. His face simply hardened like concrete setting. The last trace of hesitation vanished from his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. "The vibe is perfect," he repeated, his voice low and flat. It sounded less like a comment and more like an observation of a structural weakness he was about to exploit. "Let's see how long that lasts." Matthew walked away from the planetarium entrance, phone in hand. He didn't pace. He stood with his back to the wind, perfectly still like a statue carved from granite. I watched him dial a number. He didn't scroll through contacts. He typed it in from memory. I moved closer, drawn by a curiosity that outweighed my anxiety. I had never seen Matthew work. I knew he was in finance. I knew he did well, better than well, given that our house was paid off and our children's college funds were fully funded. But he never talked about it. He never brought work home. He was just Matthew, the guy who fixed the leaky faucet, who read bedtime stories, who wore the same 3 gray sweaters all winter. "This is Matthew," he said into the phone. His voice was low, devoid of warmth. "I need to confirm the financing terms for the Azure Cove project. Specifically, the character clause in the underwriting agreement for Andrew Sterling's development firm." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm aware of the projection numbers," he said, cutting off whoever was on the other end. "I'm looking at the ethical compliance section, paragraph 4, subsection B, conduct detrimental to the reputation of the holding company." "Yes, that one." Another pause. "Effective immediately," Matthew said. "Pull the funding. Notify the partners that the primary stakeholder has lost confidence in the leadership's moral judgment, and blacklist the firm from future capital rounds. I want the email sent now." "Yes, during the event. Make sure the notification hits his inbox before the toast." He hung up without saying goodbye. He put the phone back in his pocket and turned to face me. His expression was calm, almost serene, like he had just finished a routine chore. "Matthew," I whispered. "What did you just do?" "I enforced a boundary," he said. You pulled the funding for Andrew's resort." "I own the holding company that was underwriting the loan," he said simply. "Andrew needed $45 million to break ground. He doesn't have it anymore." "You own the holding company," I stared at him. "Since when?" "Since before I met you. I keep my name off the letterhead for a reason, Samantha." He walked over to me, taking my hands in his. His grip was warm and solid. "I don't hide my wealth because I'm ashamed of it. I hide it because it acts as a filter. It shows me who people really are when they think I have nothing to offer them. It shows me how they treat you when they think you're just ordinary." He looked deep into my eyes. "Andrew and Jessica failed the test. They treated our children like props because they thought we didn't matter. They thought we were powerless. They were wrong." I looked at this man, this quiet, steady man in his gray sweater, and realized I didn't just love him. I admired him. He hadn't just protected our children. He had taught them and me a lesson about true power. It doesn't roar. It doesn't need a yacht club. It waits until it is necessary, and then it strikes with absolute precision. "They're going to lose everything," I said, the reality sinking in. "They lost everything the moment they decided a brand image was worth more than family," Matthew replied. "I just formalized the transaction. I wasn't at the Azure Cove Yacht Club that afternoon, but I know exactly what happened. I know because when you humiliate a man in front of the very people he is trying to impress, the story travels faster than light. And I know because half the VIPs on Jessica's exclusive guest list were actually Matthew's subordinates, senior VPs, and directors from his holding company, who had accepted the invitation out of curiosity about the new development partner." At 2:30 in the afternoon, the sun was at its peak. The champagne was flowing. The brand image was by all accounts flawless. Andrew stood on the upper deck, tapping a crystal flute with a silver spoon. He was glowing with the arrogance of a man who believes he has secured his legacy. He raised his glass. "To family," he said the word, tasting like a lie in his mouth. "And to the future," As many of you know, we are on the verge of breaking ground on a $45 million resort project that will redefine luxury on this coast. To the Azure Cove expansion, there was a ripple of polite applause. Jessica stood beside him, beaming, her curated perfection finally achieved. She looked out at the crowd, satisfied that she had successfully filtered out the unpolished elements of her family. Then Andrew's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He ignored it. He smiled, about to take a sip of vintage champagne. It buzzed again. Long, urgent. Then to his left, his business partner's phone buzzed. Then a moment later, a wave of vibration moved through the crowd. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the synchronized hum of 50 corporate inboxes receiving a priority one notification simultaneously. Andrew frowned, annoyed by the distraction. He pulled his phone out, likely intending to silence it. He looked at the screen. The smile didn't just fade from his face, it fell off. The email was from the Centennial Group legal department. Subject: I immediate termination of agreement. The body of the email was short, brutal, and visible to everyone who worked for the holding company. It didn't cite market conditions. It didn't cite interest rates. It cited paragraph 4, subsection B, ethical misalignment. It explicitly stated that the financing was withdrawn due to conduct incompatible with the organization's core family values. Andrew froze. He looked up, pale and sweating. He looked at his partner, who was furiously typing on his own device, mouthing the words, "It's gone. It's all gone." But the true humiliation hadn't started yet. That began when the guests, the VIPs Jessica had sacrificed her relationship with me to impress, checked their own phones. These were men and women who reported to Matthew. They knew exactly what a priority one termination meant. It meant the person on the other end was radioactive. It meant that associating with Andrew was now a career risk. The atmosphere in the yacht club shifted instantly. It went from a celebration to a crime scene. One by one, the investors and executives put their glasses down on the white linen tables. They didn't finish their drinks. They didn't say goodbye. They simply checked the time, straightened their jackets, and walked toward the exit. "Wait," Jessica said, her voice rising in panic as she saw her meticulously curated guest list evaporating. "We haven't cut the cake yet. Where is everyone going?" Nobody answered her. They were already texting their assistants, canceling meetings with Andrew, scrubbing his firm from their contacts. In the world of high finance, silence is the loudest sound there is. Andrew stood alone on the deck, the $45 million toast dying in his throat. He looked at his phone, then at the retreating backs of his investors, and finally, he understood. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a market fluctuation. This was a sniper shot. He dialed the number for his contact at the holding company. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. He looked at Jessica, who was standing amidst the ruins of her perfect party, holding a cake knife like a weapon, confused and terrified. "Andrew," she asked, her voice trembling. "It's over," he whispered, staring at the empty marina. "The money, the deal, the reputation, it's all gone." At that exact moment across town, my children were laughing, their faces sticky with ice cream, pointing at the stars projected on the planetarium dome. They didn't know their aunt's party was imploding. They didn't know their uncle's career was dissolving. They just knew they were with parents who picked them. And that was the only status that mattered. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making pancakes when the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check the camera to know who it was. I could feel the desperation radiating from the front porch. When I opened the door, Jessica was standing there. She wasn't wearing her usual immaculate brand curator uniform. She was wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, her eyes red and swollen. She looked small. She looked ordinary. The velvet rope had been cut and she was just a woman standing outside in the cold. "Samantha," she said, her voice cracking. "Please." I stepped aside. Not out of warmth but out of curiosity. I wanted to see what she looked like when the filter was turned off. She walked into my kitchen, avoiding eye contact with the kids who were eating breakfast at the island. "I need to talk to Matthew," she whispered. "Matthew is at work," I said, "and even if he were here, he wouldn't talk to you." "Please, Sam. You have to help me. Andrew's firm. It's over. The investors pulled out. The partners are voting to remove him. We leveraged the house for this deal. If it falls through, we lose everything. Our home, the cars, everything." "I know," I said. "That's what happens when you bet your entire life on appearances." I didn't know she sobbed. I didn't know Matthew was the one financing it. I thought he just worked in finance. You thought he was nobody, I corrected. You thought he was ordinary, so you treated us like we didn't matter. You curated your guest list to impress people who work for him, Jessica. Do you realize how pathetic that is? You snubbed your own family to impress his employees. I was trying to build something, she cried. I wanted what you have, security, respect. You don't get respect by treating people like props, I said. And you don't get security by building a life on debt and exclusion. Please, she begged, grabbing my hand. Just ask him to reinstate the deal. Andrew learned his lesson. I learned my lesson. Just one call, please, for family. I pulled my hand away. Family, you told my daughter she didn't fit your aesthetic. You made my son cry because he wasn't polished enough for your yacht party. You didn't care about family when you thought you were winning. You only care about family now that you need a bailout. I looked at my children happily eating their pancakes, unbothered by the woman who had tried to make them feel small. They were resilient. They were loved. They didn't need a yacht club to know their worth. No, I said. Samantha? No. Matthew doesn't do business with people who make children cry, and neither do I. Jessica stood there for a long moment, the reality settling in. There would be no rescue. There would be no sequel. The brand was dead. She turned and walked out the door, back to a life that was about to become very, very small. Months later, Andrew's firm declared bankruptcy. They sold the townhouse. They moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. We didn't celebrate their downfall, but we didn't mourn it either. We just went on with our lives. We still go to the planetarium. We still have movie nights in our ordinary living room. And every time I look at my husband, the silent giant who loves us enough to burn down a kingdom for us, I am reminded of the only status that truly matters. We are the VIPs of our own lives. Have you ever dealt with a family member who valued their image over your feelings? How did you handle it? Tell me your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and follow for more stories about real justice.